What is the scariest thing you witnessed with your own eyes? Finding my mom unresponsive 6 months ago and subsequently watching her die as a result. Neither cell phone or landline would connect to 911, so she was dead by the time we got through to anyone. It was 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime, and now 6 months later I get the grief and the trauma with no mom to comfort me. Helped a woman move out of her apartment maybe 90 minutes after the murder-suicide of her husband and son. Police were done, but the room had not been cleaned. A very sad and harrowing experience for me. When I was around 6, we were going to my grandparents' house. On the interstate, a woman seemed to fall out of a car in front of us. My dad had to swerve to avoid hitting her. That's all I saw with my own eyes. It turned out the woman's husband was trying to murder her and make it look like a suicide. The intention was for my dad to have run her over, but he has time to swerve. The husband had an accomplice behind us, but he couldn't hit her because of how my dad swerved. Some other good Samaritan stopped and gave the woman a ride to the hospital. The guy who gave her a ride and my dad were both called as witnesses at the trial. The husband and the accomplice were both convicted for conspiracy for attempted murder. Car ablaze on side of road with passengers crawling out very slowly and on fire. Was there in the emergency room with someone close to me who had just died from a completely random brain aneurysm/seizure episode. Being there overlooking someone you know well and had just spoken to hours earlier with a flatline on the heart monitor is pretty terrifying. Especially when we had talked about death as an idea/concept not long before. My mom tried to kill herself in front of me. Watching my siblings hide away from what was going on was the only reason I stayed remotely sane. I'm glad they didn't see any of it. Working property insurance, I see death claims occasionally. Usually when someone tries to or successfully commits suicide. I had one where a mother and daughter were murdered by the daughter's ex-boyfriend. You could see the trails of blood in the hallway of the mom trying to drag herself to get help, and where he caught her and shot her in the head. It was awful. I cried and ended up having to have the claim transferred to a more seasoned adjuster. Well, it wasn't me, but my friend noticed a vehicle in the parking lot at his work, had been there a few days in the same spot. He walked up to it and found a man who blew his head off with a shotgun. Suicide note was on the dashboard. His work offered him counseling with a professional if he needed it, but he declined. He did tell me though months later he had a nightmare about it, but that was it, and he never really thought much about it after that. I was robbed at gunpoint, gun to the head, when I was like 14 during a visit to South America. It was another group of kids. What did they want? My soccer ball. My dad smashing a man's leg bones with a tire iron, then other things. Backstory: my dad isn't a big man, 5'6", 140 pounds or so. But my dad grew up tough and mean as fuck. Joined a local biker gang after the Navy kicked him out. We lived in this tiny house on the east side of Cleveland, rented to us by this fucking sleazeball. My parents are young, had me at 16. I was 6 when the landlord broke into our house and was going through my mom's underwear drawer. He had a thing for her and kept trying shit. My dad is working as a mechanic at the time and is on his way home. Dude's sitting there trying to come onto my mom. Dad walks in, sees the score. What commences is a Looney Tunes ESC style chase through the house. My dad wielding a tire iron over his head, silently closing in on this dude. Dude runs out of room, turns to fight. My dad gets him on the head first, then he blocks with his arm, bring his wrist. Guy falls down. Dad just kept going to work on him, smashed his kneecap and the two shin bones. Would have killed him if mom didn't scream. Dad got felony assault and 3 years. His friends kept my mom safe from our landlord for that time, even paid our rent once in a while. I thank God my kids don't know that life. Dad's doing good now, out of the gang but still rides. He's mellowed in his 50s. Good grandpa honestly. Guy pointed a revolver at my face and pulled the trigger. Thought for sure in that split second I was going to die. Driving up to an amusement park, Kings Island, there is this longer exit as it gets off the highway. My friend's mom just started getting on the exit lane and me and my buddy, probably around 10, watched this person jump in front of a semi. It was like the whole world just kinda stopped for those few moments. As we drove past the body, I fully remember the jeans around their ankle and the body just twitching. I really don't think I will ever forget the image. A guy I was playing golf with had a massive heart attack on the tee box. He fell on the ground not moving, was foaming at the mouth, and peed his pants. The fire truck and ambulance drove out on the course and saved him. Scary shit. When I was a kid, I witnessed my drunk stepfather wielding a loaded shotgun with the safety off. It was pointed inches from the face of my dog, and he threatened to blow her head off right then and there. Fortunately, he didn't shoot her in front of me. Bad news is that she ran away leaving her collar and tags behind. A few days later, a woman vomiting so much blood that she was dying before my eyes. This was in the hospital. Somehow we managed to get her stable enough to get an emergency scope, and she lived. Was home alone as a teenager during an aggravated burglary. Heard something slamming into front door, went to go open it, and realized I had locked the wire screen door, so it seemed odd they were knocking so hard directly onto the wooden door. Instead looked out the window and to the side to see a heavy man that I did not recognize. I yelled out, "What did he want?" No answer. Yelled a few more times. He stopped, then started shoulder ramming the door. I panicked and went to grab the phone and a kitchen knife, but halfway to the kitchen, I heard a huge crash at the back end of the house. Meanwhile, the ramming was still happening at the front door. Heard someone scurrying through the back of the house swearing. Panicking, I didn't want to get caught in the middle of the house by two people, so decided to burst out through the front door and bowl over whoever was out there, knowing it was just one person, because I had seen him through the window. So that's what I did. Exploded out the front door, knocked the guy over, and ran out into the street and to a neighbor's and called the police. They were gone by the time the police arrived. Incidentally, they came back twice the next week, and again when I wasn't home. The neighbors told me, ended up catching them, but definitely left a lasting fear in me. The 2018 earthquake in Alaska, that lasted for a minute and a half. I was on the top floor of an old building, and the way everything was shaking and falling, I thought for sure the building was going to crumble beneath my feet. A minute and a half doesn't seem long, but it's an eternity when that's what you're seeing all around you. When I was 9, seeing my 8-year-old cousin rolling on the asphalt with a hole in his forehead after getting hit by a motorcycle that was going at 40 miles per hour. So I didn't witness the actual event, but the aftermath of it still haunts me. A while back I was an environmental technician for a huge industrial waste remediation company. We did a lot of work for the railroad companies. Every now and again we'd get a biohazard call for what they label as a trespasser strike. Usually it's an animal that has the misfortune to be passing by one of the speed liners. In this instance it was a person. At least that's what I was told. There was nothing left of them except blood, bone fragments, and goop that went for about a mile. Biggest problem was the rail lines were still electrified, so wherever their biomass hit the tracks it was fried on there. Think egg on a cast iron pan that never gets flipped and sits there for hours. I will always remember that smell, even through my respirator. A kid in preschool getting his skull bashed in by another 4-year-old with one of those big old wooden blocks. I've never seen so much blood. After that the wooden blocks got replaced by cardboard ones. 35 years later I still see it clearly. Driving home from work one night. Tons of traffic. I'm sitting second at a red light turning left, and this truck stops in the opposite lane to leave an opening so the car in front of me can turn. It was a traffic jam, so he would have stopped in the intersection if he didn't. car turns. Out of nowhere this semi is driving super fast along the side of the road, not in a lane. 1 second the turning car is there, the next second it is blown to pieces. I was turning right behind them. Maybe was 10 feet away from it. Felt almost surreal how close I was. I was standing 6 feet away and watched a full-size horse kick some kid in the face. The kid is now considered mentally challenged. A guy getting head stomped against a tile floor and blood coming out of his ears. It was 3 AM. I was at the end of an 11-hour shift, and I had recently done the first year of paramedics college in Canada, but decided to quit, and somehow everyone thought that made me the most qualified to deal with it. When I was 7, my dad was driving me and my brother to a friend's birthday party. On the highway, we passed the worst vehicle accident I've ever seen to this day. A semi hit and ran over a motorcycle. The motorcyclist was torn to pieces. I've never been more horrified in my life. My father also drove a motorcycle at the time. He sold it because of what we saw. I saw a guy get hit by a car walking in downtown Victoria, BC. The man flipped into the air, both his shoes flew off. He sat right up in the street, looking confused. When I was 12, my family and I took a road trip to Florida, and as my mom was driving through Ocala, I saw a store with police tape around the gas pumps and a car with a limp body laying halfway out of the open driver's store door and a pool of blood on the ground in front of him. It looked like, and probably was, a murder scene, and nobody else in the car seemed to notice it. I never mentioned it to any of them. I just stayed quiet and tried to forget what I just saw. It still haunts me. More recently, I saw a man try to ride his bike through an automatic gate before it shut, and he didn't make it. He slammed into the gate, and one of the spikes impaled him through the neck. This was at one of my job sites, landscaping, Hoa condo complex, and my coworker gave him a towel to hold over his gaping neck wound. The man was still conscious and standing. We called 911 and an ambulance took him to the hospital. About a week later, we were back at that location and the man approached me in good spirits. He was thankful that we helped him out, and I was glad to see he was okay. Apparently, the spike missed a major artery by hair. Finally, when I was 9, my brother and I were walking around Daytona Beach with a friend, barefoot on beachside in the bad part of town. Our friend thought it would be a good idea to pick up a stick and poke a homeless man who was sleeping behind a hedgerow in a parking lot, and when the man didn't respond, he continued to poke him. Finally, the man had enough, grabbed a gun from under his sleeping bag, and pointed it at us. He told us to get our asses away from his bush, and we ran like hell. In retrospect, it was more sad than scary, and we totally deserved the scare. He just wanted to be left alone, and good on him for having protection. I only learned years later how many homeless people are beaten to death by sick young punks. Beheaded bodies. 30 years ago during the war in Balkans. It was many years ago. I was driving Uber, heading home and the sun was coming up. There was a girl laying in the road, got out to check on her. She was passed out. I dragged her to the side of the road and could smell the booze, so I woke her up. She immediately tried to get up and run back into oncoming traffic saying she wanted to die and her friends were so mean. I held her down while she fought me screaming until the ambulance came. She was 15. The ambulance took her away. I hope she's okay and got help she needed. Well, one day I woke up late for school and the house was being raided. Cops came into my room, and I had probably a half dozen guns pointed at me. Also saw a toddler get run over by a car. I saw a kid get hit by a car. I lived within a stone's throw from my school, so I walked home. He was crossing a street and was just in front of me. A car clipped him and he spun to the ground. He was ockish, just a broken arm. There was a car hiding behind a bus. He didn't see it, and obviously the driver didn't see him, My mom was actually 2 cars behind the accident and got the kid home. I have no idea what happened to the driver, but I remember the kid spinning and remember it being pretty scary. Was stuck on a metro in a long tunnel with our cab filling with the smoke and smell of fire. I was terrified that there'd be an inferno and that was how I would die along with the 300 or so people also on the rail. Thanksgiving Day 2010. I was 17. My parents woke me up without warning kind of early and my mom was sobbing. My dad tells me my 21-year-old sister had some sort of mental breakdown at college and that they were going to pick her up. She had been taken in by the state police. They found her wandering in some field off the highway totally incoherent, but she had managed to call 911. My dad only talked to me for a few minutes before they left and didn't return until much later. I'm not sure what was more messed up, seeing her completely off her rocker and having to talk my only sibling down from escaping my parents' house, or all the stuff that could have happened to her. She was talking about having visions of God speaking to her directly and was talking about people who weren't real. It was traumatizing AF. I have so much respect for her to go back and finish her bay after something so life-altering. I also lost all respect for her classmates and friends that wouldn't help her and turned their backs on her after her episode. She ended up in the psych ward for almost 2 months and has struggled with her mental health ever since. She just went back into a psych ward yesterday for the first time in a few years, but I have hope she'll bounce back pretty fast this time. This whole ordeal and the things she's gone through have totally changed my view on mental health and the stigma with it. It has affected me so much that the horror novel I'm outlining is basically going to serve as a metaphor for the narrative of mental health over the past century and how we need be more receptive and address the way anyone with mental health issues is treated. You know those scenes where the child is hit by a car and looks like a doll being thrown down the street? Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like in real life. I got the experience of telling her mother about it. 30 years later she is a proud mom, but still not over all of the damage. Was the first to come upon a fatal motorcycle accident. The scene was horrific. Looking down the barrel of a real and loaded gun held by a child. Damn. Apparently I have a couple of them, and I can't really decide. When my second nephew was born, my brother lived in a house that smelled so strongly of mold. I told him it made my eyes burn when I walked in. My then sister-in-law for some reason had always dreamt of living in that house because her older brother had. I did everything I could to clean it before the baby came. It was in an old town, and it was a town doctor's house from like the early 1900s. They got tired of me bitching once he was born, and I wasn't allowed back. My mom died, and a few weeks later I got a call that he was about to die too. Went to the hospital, and he was covered in mold. Seriously. Mold. I held him in my arms while he was screaming, and he just smelled like the same mold in that house. I had a moldy baby in my arms that I helped deliver a few weeks earlier, and every time he threw up on me, I almost threw up too. He got transferred to an intensive care unit about an hour away, and at night they would go out to the bars and get drunk and leave him alone. I take back my previous entries. This was the most terrifying. I fucking hate them for being such irresponsible asshole parents that should have never had a child. I cut all ties with everyone directly after that. He lived and I'm so glad. He has no idea who I am. My first project as a construction superintendent, we had a water truck stuck in a mud hole when a concrete truck driver offered to help pull the water truck out of the muck. The cable used between both trucks snapped and whipped through my foreman's head, just under his hard hat. An electrician and I held his head off of the ground while he passed away. When I was about 22, lived in an apartment with a roommate. She had gone out on a date, and I had asked her if I could put her smaller TV in my room to watch it. I was woken up sometime in the night to a scratching noise coming from the corner of the bedroom. I remembered I had her TV and thought maybe she'd come home and wanted it back and was trying to unplug it without turning the light on. I said, "Julie, it's okay, just turn the light on." Well, Julie was a blonde, and in the moonlight coming in from my British Rail window I could see that the person who jumped up had long dark hair. I said, "Who the fuck are you, and what the fuck are you doing in my bedroom?" and started to get out of my bed. To make a long story short, someone was an hour app trying to steal the TV. This was in the early 70s, so T.Vs were good to pawn for money and had several other items set out to take with him, including my purse. Anyways, I ended up chasing him out of the apartment. I actually think he was maybe more scared than I was, because I was extremely pissed off. Guy jumping off an overpass directly in front of a semi. I was staying in a hotel with my cousin, her boyfriend and my husband, and we were sharing a room. In the middle of the night, I woke up and saw my husband standing at the foot of my cousin's bed just staring down at her and her boyfriend. I asked him what he was doing. He didn't answer, so I shrugged it off and rolled over, only to realize my husband was asleep in bed next to me. I jumped up, turned on the lights, and checked the closet and bathroom, but no one was there.